Sri Krishna Parabrahmane Namaha. Sri Sadguru Paramatmane Namaha. Sarva Maharshibhyo Namaha. 56th Sloka. Dhukeshvanu Manaha Sukeshu Vigataspruha Vitaraga Bayakrodaha Stitadehi Muniruchyate. Substance. He whose mind is not troubled in sorrow, who does not hanker after pleasures and is free from attachment, fear and hatred is called the sage of study wisdom. Commentary. The characteristics of Sthitaprajna are further elaborated here. Mind is not troubled in sorrow means the mind is of the Sthitaprajna is not troubled by the sorrows, disasters and calamities of life. The sun, who is far above the storm clouds, is not affected by thunder, lightning and rain. In the same way, pain and pleasure are the natural reactions of the mind to external phenomenon, and Atma, being above the mind, that is transcending the mind, is not affected by its modifications. It remains as the witness of the mind. In the same way, as the sun is just the witness of what is happening in the lower region of the earth. Vasishtha explains to Rama that just as arrows cannot powder a mountain, just as the sea waves cannot move the mountain on the shore, just as the lotus creeper cannot bind an elephant, even so the sorrows and troubles of the world cannot affect the Jivan Mukta, the Sthita Prajna, who does not hanker after pleasures. The Sthita Prajna does not hanker after the pleasures of the body and the senses. He is not thrown off his self-state when pleasant and delighted things come to him. Pain and pleasure are just two different waves of the mind. One wave is called pleasure and another is called pain. Both are caused by the contact of the mind with external objects. If the object is agreeable, there is a wave of pleasure. If the object is undesirable, there is a wave of pain. The Sthita Prajna, whose mind is firmly established in Atma, is not moved one way or the other when pleasant and unpleasant things occur. The Jivan Mukta has found himself one with the ocean of bliss, and as such, how can he think of attaching himself to any kind of material pleasure? He knows that little pleasures are only ripples on the surface of the ocean of bliss and that they are shadowy reflections of his own self. No one can cling to the pleasures of a dream when he awakens from the dream. If really he desires such pleasures, it only shows that he has not yet fully awakened from the dream. So also, he who clings to worldly pleasures arising from the senses and sense objects, it is not a Sthita Prajna. Who we have the shining example of Sukha as the Sthita Prajna par excellence. If today we come across a man of such caliber who can look upon pain and pleasure with an equal eye, verily we have to honor him as Jivan Mukta. Free from attachment, fear and hatred means, again it is pointed out that the Sthita Prajna is free from the attachment, fear and hatred. To the man of knowledge, everything appears as Atma, in the same way as everything appears as material objects to the ignorant man. What then can he desire? Whom can he fear or hate? The same truth is declared in the Isavasya Upanishad also. For the wise man who knows that everything is that one Atma, there can be no delusion and no sorrow. He has realized that all that exists is only the Supreme Self and nothing else. Fear and hatred arise only when there is a second thing. When all this is one indivisible Satchidananda, absolute, where is fear and where is hate? He is himself everything. Can he hate himself? Can he fear himself? No. That is the state of Jivan Mukta, the Sthita Prajna, supreme and transcendental. Munihi means the sage who is engaged in speechless absorption in the self is a Muni. Only such a strong willed man of action can ascend the peak of the Soham, I am he mount. The idle and the lethargic have no chance of winning the goal. The sage who has acquired one pointed concentration in the self is Sthita Prajna. Question: what further qualities of the Sthita Prajna are mentioned here? Answer: he is not distressed by sorrow, does not hanker after pleasure, he is free from attachment, fear, and hatred. 57th sloka. यः सर्वत्रानभिस्नेहः तत्तत् प्राप्य शुभाशुभं नाभिनन्दति न द्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. Substance: he who has no attachment to anything anywhere, who does not rejoice and hate when good and bad things happen, his wisdom is fixed and steady. He is a Sthita Prajna. Commentary: in the Gita, we find that the Lord uses the general term Yah, anybody, without limiting its scope to any caste or creed, race or nationality. Anyone who has acquired firmness in the wisdom of the self is declared to be a Sthita Prajna, whoever he is and whatever way he is, be his caste or creed. This is the sign of the universality of the Gita. Without attachment in all things mean one should be detached from and indifferent to everything in the world. Of course, no one is attached to unpleasant things. A similar attitude is to be cultivated towards pleasant things also. Things pleasant and unpleasant are both in the domain of Maya, and the self is beyond Maya. And so these lower modifications do not in any way affect the self. The Sthita Prajna, having reached the self state, is not at all concerned with them. The man of wisdom does not seek for anything, and yet nature brings many things to him, both pleasant and unpleasant, in the course of his life. But he neither rejoices nor laments when these things happen of their own accord. He remains immovable like a mountain, in a state of perfect equanimity. This is the mark of Sthita Prajna. It should be understood that the Lord is not advocating a cowardly spirit desisting from the battlefield of life with all its duties, obligations, and responsibilities. Detachment is not neglect of duty. In fact, Arjuna was confused at first when he thought that he could attain peace by running away from the battlefield and taking up the life of a mendicant. The whole of the Gita is intended to emphasize that the challenge of life should be met with courage, equanimity, and knowledge of the real self. Frustration may put on the garb of detachment. Cowardice may shine under the mask of renunciation. These are the common delusions of a weak mind. The Lord here insists that the good and the bad should be met without elation or depression. The Sthita Prajna knows how to live life under all circumstances with the mental equipoise and the joy of wisdom. Question: what other characteristics of the Sthita Prajna are mentioned here? Answer: the Sthita Prajna is not attached to anything. He does not rejoice or hate when pleasant and unpleasant things happen in the course of his life. 58th sloka. Yada samharate chayam kurmonganiva sarvashaha indriyani indriyartebhyaha tasya prajna pratishtita. Substance. When the yogi, like the tata, is drawing back its limbs into its own shell, withdraws all the senses from the sense objects, his wisdom is firmly fixed. He is then a sthita prajna. Commentary. For self realization, moksha, control of the senses is essential. When the senses are drawn back from contact with the sense objects like sound, color, etc., then the intellect is rooted in Atma. The same truth is stated by Patanjali in the sutras. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha tadadrushtuhu swarupe avasthanum. These two sutras are affirmed by the verse. It means that the senses, which by their nature run after worldly objects, should be drawn back, and the mind centered in Atma. When this is done firmly and when there is no deviation from the self, one's knowledge becomes perfect. This idea is very clearly brought out by means of an illustration. The tortoise withdraws all its limbs into its own shell at the slightest apprehension of danger from outside. Even if the shell is hacked into pieces, it would not extend its limbs. The yogi, like the tortoise, would draw back his senses from the objective world and settle himself in the self. It is not enough to restrain one of the senses from one set of objects. Of course, if one sense is controlled, it will make the control of others easy. The yogi should withdraw all the senses from all the worldly objects. That is why the word sarvashaha is used, even if all the doors are closed except one. Though through that one door, dacoits may enter the house. Even if one window is kept open, a gust of wind from it may extinguish the lamp. So it is absolutely necessary that all the senses should be turned back and there should be no contact with the external world. It is the sense organs which make the person aware of the outside world. When they are drawn back, there is no external world. In deep sleep, there is no external world because the senses are not functioning. Similarly, the yogi should stop the operation of the senses in his fully conscious state, and then the mind sees the self within. Sense restraint is thus the first and foremost of all spiritual disciplines. Question. When does a man become sthitaprajna? Answer. When he withdraws all the senses from the objective world and turns his mind inwards, he becomes a sthitaprajna.